May 24th, 1941, 0600 hours. HMS Hood, pride of the Royal Navy, explodes with such violence that her 860-foot hull simply vanishes from the surface of the Denmark Strait, killing 1,416 sailors in less than 4 minutes. What Admiralty records never disclosed was that the battlecruiser was not just hunting the German battleship Bismarck. She was carrying Winston Churchill's personal authorization to negotiate a separate peace with Germany if Britain faced imminent invasion. For 60 years, families believed their loved ones died in heroic combat against superior German gunnery during a routine naval engagement. The wreck, discovered in 2001, tells a radically different story. Evidence scattered across 3 miles of ocean floor reveals diplomatic pouches and classified communications equipment that had no place aboard a frontline warship. Recently declassified Cabinet War Room documents expose a contingency plan so secret that even Admiral Holland was unaware of the Hood's dual mission. What peace offer was worth risking Britain's most famous warship? And why did Churchill choose the Denmark Strait as the moment to prepare for potential surrender? The answer lies in War Cabinet Directive 7. Black, Winston Churchill's personally drafted contingency plan for a negotiated armistice if Germany achieved air superiority over Britain. An invasion became inevitable. Sealed in diplomatic pouches aboard the Hood were preliminary peace terms that would preserve the British Isles while ceding control of the empire to German administration, maintaining the monarchy while accepting Nazi hegemony over Europe. This was not defeatism. This was statecraft of the highest order. Churchill, the bulldog of British resistance, privately recognized that Britain's survival might depend on having diplomatic options beyond fighting to the last man. The Denmark Strait provided the perfect cover, neutral Danish waters where diplomatic contact could occur under the guise of naval operations, away from parliamentary oversight and public knowledge. Admiral Lancelot Holland carried sealed orders to rendezvous with a Swedish diplomatic vessel if the engagement with the Bismarck failed to produce decisive results, and if intelligence indicated German invasion preparations had reached critical mass. The Hood's diplomatic mission was compartmentalized to such an extreme degree that only 3 men aboard knew of its existence: Admiral Holland himself, the ship's captain Ralph Kerr, and communications officer Lieutenant Commander John Richardson. Even they were unaware of the contents of the diplomatic pouches, merely that they contained materials of the highest national security classification to be transferred to neutral intermediaries under specific coded instructions. What made this contingency so explosive was not just the potential surrender terms, but the constitutional crisis it would have triggered. Churchill had bypassed normal parliamentary procedures to create this diplomatic back channel, recognizing that Britain's survival might require acting with decisive speed if invasion became imminent. The 1,416 sailors who died with the Hood were unwittingly protecting Britain's secret insurance policy against defeat. It was Churchill's recognition that saving the nation might require sacrificing the empire. To understand why Churchill took such an extraordinary step, we need to examine the catastrophic military position Britain found itself in by May 1941. The timeline of disasters that led to this desperate diplomatic contingency begins with the evacuation at Dunkirk in May 1940, where Britain abandoned nearly all its heavy military equipment to escape from continental Europe. The British Army, once the backbone of imperial power, had been reduced to a defensive militia lacking tanks, artillery, and modern equipment. By July 1940, the Battle of Britain began, putting tremendous strain on Royal Air Force Fighter Command. German air superiority would be the essential precondition for Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Britain. While history celebrates Britain's victory in the skies, Churchill received daily intelligence briefings showing how close Fighter Command came to collapse. On multiple occasions in August 1940, several Royal Air Force airfields were temporarily rendered inoperable, pushing Britain perilously close to the breaking point. September 1940 brought the London Blitz, demonstrating Germany's capability to devastate British industrial capacity and civilian morale. The sustained bombing campaign killed over 40,000 civilians and destroyed more than 1 million homes. Churchill, visiting bomb sites across London, saw firsthand the psychological toll and began to consider previously unthinkable contingencies. By October 1940, Churchill secretly authorized the Foreign Office to prepare conditional surrender documentation, not for immediate use, but as a prudent preparation for worst-case scenarios. The destruction of Coventry in November 1940 further proved Germany's ability to devastate British cities at will, reinforcing the need for diplomatic alternatives if military resistance became untenable. The passage of Lend-Lease in March 1941 provided critical material support from the United States, but Churchill recognized this was merely delaying the inevitable unless America entered the war directly. American neutrality remained firm, with polls showing overwhelming public opposition to direct military involvement. Churchill needed time, a reprieve that a negotiated peace might provide if circumstances deteriorated further. When the Bismarck sortied on May 18, 1941, Churchill saw an opportunity. The Denmark Strait, international waters between Iceland and Greenland, offered a perfect location for potential diplomatic contact. The Hood, already scheduled to intercept the Bismarck, received sealed diplomatic pouches during its final departure from Scapa Flow on May 22, 1941. These documents were not intended for immediate use, but rather as insurance against Britain's increasingly precarious position. The diplomatic pouches contained preliminary peace proposals that would have preserved Britain's homeland sovereignty while accepting German dominance in continental Europe. The monarchy would remain, but with significantly reduced powers. The British Empire would be gradually transitioned to joint Anglo-German administration, with key naval bases made available for German use. Most controversially, Britain would agree to cease all support for resistance movements in occupied territories and accept German economic integration. These terms, while seemingly catastrophic, were designed as a starting position for negotiations that might preserve Britain's core sovereignty until American intervention became possible. Churchill recognized that negotiating from a position of strength required having the option before military defeat made any terms impossible. The diplomatic mission aboard the Hood was insurance, not surrender, a recognition of strategic reality rather than abandonment of resistance. At 5:35 hours on May 24th, HMS Hood and HMS Prince of Wales engaged the German battleship Bismarck and heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen in the Denmark Strait. The Hood, despite being 20 years old, remained the pride of the Royal Navy, a symbol of British naval supremacy that had ruled the waves since Trafalgar. What only 3 men aboard understood was that the ship carried Britain's diplomatic contingency plans alongside its massive 15-inch guns. By 5:52 hours, HMS Hood's gunnery had achieved several near misses on Bismarck, with one confirmed hit that damaged the German battleship's fuel systems. Admiral Holland believed he had achieved a tactical advantage and ordered a course change to unmask Hood's rear turrets, preparing to bring maximum firepower to bear on the German vessels. At exactly 5:58 hours, Hood executed this turn, exposing her less armored deck to German fire at a critical moment. What happened next was both military disaster and diplomatic catastrophe. At 6 o'clock, a single 15-inch shell from Bismarck struck HMS Hood near her aft magazine, close to the secure compartment, housing the diplomatic pouches and specialized communications equipment. Within 15 seconds, the shell penetration triggered a catastrophic magazine explosion that tore through the mighty battlecruiser. The diplomatic mission, Churchill's insurance policy against total defeat, was incinerated along with the ammunition stores. At 6 o'clock and 30 seconds, Hood broke in half, her bow rising vertically before plunging beneath the waves. By 6:01, only 3 men from her crew of 1,419 survived. The Prince of Wales, heavily damaged and forced to withdraw, transmitted a coded message back to the Admiralty. Hood lost, diplomatic cargo destroyed. This seemingly routine battle report carried special significance to the handful of War Cabinet officials aware of the contingency mission. By 6:05, Britain's secret diplomatic alternative to total war rested 9,800 feet beneath the Denmark Strait. The mission had not been to immediately surrender, but rather to preserve the option for negotiation should Britain's military situation deteriorate further. Now that option was gone, committed to the depths along with 1,416 sailors who never knew their secondary mission. The loss of Hood resonated far beyond its military significance. Vice Admiral Holland had been one of the few senior officers trusted with knowledge of the contingency plans. His death eliminated one of the architects of Britain's diplomatic insurance policy. The specialized communications equipment, designed to establish secure contact with neutral intermediaries, represented months of technical development, now lost to the ocean floor. That technical work had been crucial to any back channels Britain might have used. Most significantly, the diplomatic pouches contained the only fully authorized versions of the conditional surrender terms. Churchill had deliberately kept no copies in London to maintain absolute secrecy and deniability. With their destruction, Britain's diplomatic flexibility vanished precisely at the moment when military options were narrowing. The destruction of Hood created a strategic trap for Churchill. Without the diplomatic alternatives contained in those lost pouches, Britain had no choice but to pursue total victory or face unconditional surrender. Churchill made an immediate decision. The contingency plan would never be acknowledged. Instead, the Hood's destruction would be portrayed as purely military loss, heroic sacrifice, rather than diplomatic catastrophe. In Parliament, Churchill delivered his famous "We shall fight on the beaches" speech just days after the Hood's sinking, never hinting that Britain's diplomatic insurance policy now lay scattered across the Denmark Strait seabed. The government remained entirely unaware of how close Britain had come to preparing negotiated surrender options. The families of the 1,416 sailors were told their sons died in conventional combat against superior German firepower, never learning that they had been protecting Churchill's secret path to conditional peace. This strategic trap had profound implications for Britain's conduct of the war. Without diplomatic alternatives, Churchill committed the nation to victory or extinction. A gamble of extraordinary proportion given Britain's military position in mid-1941. The American factor became all-important, and Britain staked everything on eventual U.S. entry into the war. Roosevelt himself remained unaware that Britain's surrender option had died with the Hood. For the British public, the sinking became a rallying cry rather than cause for despair. The morale value of maintaining the narrative of inevitable victory outweighed any military reality. Churchill recognized that revealing the Hood's diplomatic mission would shatter this essential national myth. The loss of Hood thus created a self-reinforcing cycle. Without diplomatic alternatives, Britain had no choice but to project absolute confidence in military victory. For 60 years, the Hood's diplomatic secrets remained secure beneath nearly 2 miles of North Atlantic water. Then, on July 12, 2001, marine archaeologist David Mearns led an expedition that finally located the battlecruiser's remains at 9,800 feet. What the remotely operated vehicle cameras revealed startled even experienced naval historians. The wreckage pattern was inconsistent with a standard magazine explosion. The Hood had broken apart in a manner suggesting multiple detonation points, including one near a compartment that had no business being filled with explosives. Initial survey revealed a specialized storage area separate from standard ammunition magazines and crew quarters. The compartment matched no known design specifications for the Hood's class of battlecruiser. More telling was the discovery of unusual communications equipment fragments. The remains of an advanced wireless set designed for diplomatic rather than military communications were identified in a section of the wreck that should have contained only gunnery control systems. This specialized equipment had the capability to transmit on frequencies reserved for neutral diplomatic communications, technology that had no obvious purpose on a frontline warship. The most significant discovery came in 2005, when deep-water recovery efforts brought up waterlogged fragments of what appeared to be Foreign Office correspondence. The preservation of these documents was extraordinary, protected by watertight diplomatic pouches and then by the extreme cold and pressure of the deep ocean environment. While heavily damaged, partial text confirmed connections to cabinet directive protocols and contingency planning. This physical evidence coincided with the declassification of certain cabinet war room records under Britain's 30-year rule. These newly available archives confirmed Winston Churchill's authorization of conditional surrender document preparation in October 1940, though they carefully avoided explicitly connecting those preparations to the Hood's final mission. The most compelling breakthroughs came from intelligence work in the early 2000s. Analysis of previously encrypted Admiralty communications revealed coded references to diplomatic support configuration during Hood's final deployment orders. These communications, using specialized terminology reserved for the highest level of government contingencies, provide the strongest documentary evidence of the Hood's dual mission. Strategic vindication of this theory comes from the extensive contingency planning we now know occurred throughout 1940 to 1941. Winston Churchill, while publicly projecting absolute confidence, privately ensured Britain maintained diplomatic flexibility through multiple channels. The Hood's mission represents not an aberration, but confirmation of Churchill's pragmatic leadership, preparing for the worst while working toward the best outcome. What if the Hood had survived? The alternative history suggested by War Cabinet Directive 7. Black offers a fascinating glimpse into a different potential outcome of World War II. Had Britain negotiated conditional surrender terms in mid-1941, Germany might have consolidated control over continental Europe, while leaving the British homeland nominally independent. The monarchy would have survived, though under effective German supervision. The British Empire would have been gradually dismantled through joint administration rather than through post-war decolonization. This scenario reveals Winston Churchill's extraordinary strategic wisdom. While publicly proclaiming the words, "We shall never surrender," he privately recognized that leadership requires preparing for defeat while planning for victory. His willingness to consider sacrificing the empire to preserve the homeland demonstrated a clear-eyed understanding of Britain's core national interests. The diplomatic courage required to prepare such contingencies while rallying the nation to resist at all costs reflects the complexity of wartime leadership. Churchill understood that the appearance of total commitment to victory was essential for maintaining morale, even while prudently preparing alternatives should that commitment prove militarily untenable. The 1,416 sailors who died aboard HMS Hood thus protected not just Britain's military position, but its diplomatic options. Their sacrifice maintained Britain's ability to negotiate from strength rather than capitulate from weakness, an insurance policy that ultimately proved unnecessary but represented prudent statecraft at the darkest hour. Modern parallels abound in how contemporary leaders prepare diplomatic alternatives behind public military posturing. From the Cuban Missile Crisis to recent international conflicts, the lesson of the Hood's secret mission remains relevant. Effective leadership requires maintaining diplomatic options, even while publicly committed to military solutions. The memorial question now becomes how to honor those who died protecting options for peace rather than just paths to victory. The Hood's crew deserve recognition not just for their combat against Bismarck, but for their unwitting protection of Britain's diplomatic alternatives, the hidden dimension of their sacrifice that remained buried at sea for 6 decades. The HMS Hood sailors died protecting Winston Churchill's darkest contingency, his recognition that Britain might need to choose survival over imperial glory. Their sacrifice reveals the hidden diplomatic war beneath naval battles. For more investigations into secret maritime missions that shaped history, subscribe to Ocean Attacks. What other legendary warships carried classified truths that vanished beneath the waves with their crews?